So let's say what they say about calles and Mexico, and Spain went through, their period as well. Here's a very famous picture of a man being martyred, stretching his arms out like across fearlessly, because he knew he was dying for Christ. During the pontificate of Pius the 11th, and again, this is the Catholic book, so it's going to date things by the popes, but doesn't mean it's all incorrect. The persecution of Catholics was not limited to the Soviet Union and Germany. Traditionally Catholic Mexico and Spain had broken into civil war. Pius XI was forced to confront, as he described in his 1937 encyclical on communism, Divini Redemptoris, the indiscriminate slaughter, I guess that's what that means in Latin, of bishops, priests, and men and women, religious as well as thousands of lay people. The situation in Spain had been deteriorating for years as forces of the left and the right competed for power. After King Alfonso the 13th was forced to leave the country, the Republic was proclaimed in 1931. The government uh, disestablished the church, secularized education, and sanctioned the burning of churches in 1936. The leftist government of the socialists, anarchists, and communists, called the Popular Front, came to power in an election. Many feared the revolution by the radical left was now imminent. In July that year, Spanish army units in Morocco rebelled, and soon Spain was engulfed in a civil war. As Spain divided, European powers backed each side, mimicking the alliances that would soon build during World War II. The nationalist forces, led by General Francisco Franco, had military support from Italy and Germany, while the Republicans were aided by the Soviet Union and the leftist international brigades. Again, when I was young, there were people alive who were part of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade who went over and served in the Spanish-American War. They were old, and that was still a question on the test when entering, when you were drafted. Were you ever a member of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade? For years, the Civil War, for years before the Civil War, leftists and Freemasons had waged attacks on the church. Churches were sometimes sacked, burned, and clerics were assassinated. The Civil War brought a reign of terror on a much larger scale. Between July 18th and July 31st in 1936, 50 priests were killed in Madrid, and a third of the city's 150 churches were sacked and burned. In August, more than 2,000 priests and religious were killed in a Republican zone of the country. The killing declined as Franco's government guaranteed greater control of the country, or gained greater control of the country, but they continued sporadically until the war's end. In all, 6,832 priests and religious and 13 bishops were martyred from 1938 to 1939. 1 out of 7 dioceses and priests, and 1 out of every 5 male members of a religious orders were killed because of their Catholic faith. Some executions occurred after hasty trials by people's courts. Other victims were simply lynched. Pope Pius XI called the bloodbath the natural fruit of a system which lacks all internal restraint. 1 million died, brutal struggle, from which nationalists emerged victorious in 1939. Franco's authoritarian regime suppressed opposition and executed opponents, but maintained stability, ended such of the violence against the Catholic Church, and kept Spain out of World War II. The events in Mexico followed a similar pattern. Mexico had been a Catholic country since colonial times, but revolutionaries, Freemasons, and various political reformers frequently turned to the Church after the coming of independence in the 19th century. The Revolution of 1917 made Mexico the world's first socialist, anti-religious constitutional revolutionary republic. The church could not own property, and any privileges it previously held were removed. Anti-Christian sentiments were so high that the government of the Tabasco province, a particularly brutal prosecutor of the religion, named his children Lenin, Lucifer, and Satan. Violence was common in Mexico, particularly under the regime of Plutarco Calles. Remember me always talking about Calles? That evil fucker? 1922 to 1928. And persecution even naturally led to an armed rebellion by Catholics called Cristeros. The rebellion was quickly put down, and a well-known martyr of the rebel by Miguel Pro S.J. was executed by firing squad on November 23, 1927. Just before his death, he cried out, "Viva Cristo Rey! Long live Christ the King!" By Miguel Pro was beautiful, and by St. John Paul II in 1988 and in 2000, the same Pope declared several of the Cristeros saints. His feast day is celebrated on November 23rd. During the years of the rebellion, the government killed 250,000 to 300,000 people, most of them Catholics, between late 1931 and early 1936. 480 churches, schools, orphanages, hospitals were closed or used for other functions such as movie theaters, garages, and shops. Beginning around 1940, there was a gradual easing of the persecution in Mexico. Authorities relaxed their enforcement of anti-clerical laws. However, more than half a century still had to pass before the religious rights of the church and the Mexican people were restored. I all encourage you to watch for greater glory. These two, that's why I changed my thing to Cristero Warrior, because I idolize those men. Alright, peace to you.